expressed in this show belong to the person expressing them. They do not purport to reflect the opinions or views of Rancher or any other entity.
Thank you. That should fix things. I'm new at this. Give me a break. Everything is fine. Better? Cool. Sounds good. So, for anybody who's new, or for anybody that didn't see yesterday's show or hasn't heard any of the rumors on Discord, Adrian was previously doing a weekly show where he did the A/B test, the hot seat, all that stuff. I took in for I'm sitting in for Friday for Tool of the Day. I felt like the Tool of the Day section needed a little bit more time. Some of the tools that he's mentioned on the show are real neat, but in the overage that Adrian usually has over the show, there's not usually enough time to give them the proper dedicated the time that they need. And so that's what I plan to do with these Fridays. Let me know if somebody already is going to start winning that game where you distract me on Discord. I'm going to have to stay really disciplined not to watch that. But anyways, so the point of today's show is there are three main points, and I think they were listed on the YouTube video. I want to first go over the tool of the day or a recent tool of the day. I'm not going to restrict myself to the most recent tool of the day because I might not be qualified or good enough to go through one of the tool of the days. But if after I've chosen a tool of the day, we'll go into a little bit more detail. I'll go through the repo. I'll go over some of the ways that I pick apart a tool and find out where it's going to be useful, maybe where it can use a little bit of help, and if possible, if time permitting, or if there's some room for improvement, we'll go through the process and we'll help out the developer. Today I'm kind of cheating because this is my first show. I kind of did some of this beforehand. So anything that fails is a live failure, but there's a lot, it's kind of already paved down the road. Oh, I did also want to point out, before I forget and get into things, that Adrian is in the live channel if you guys wanted to join the live audio, so you guys can all talk about me behind my back. Hopefully there's some good conversation there. But without further ado, I'm going to start going over the most recent tool of the day. Yesterday's tool of the day was the Docker Hub Rate Limit Exporter. So you may or may not be aware that the changes to Docker's service plans going through that will give you a certain amount of requests that you can make against the Docker Hub APIs. And this is just going to be a Prometheus exporter that's going to give you visual or access to that information so that you can make adjustments and corrections if you needed to, if you're worried that I guess you're going to run out of your quota. So yesterday, once I saw this repo, I opened it up. Here's the Git repo. I should make this, at some point in time, I should probably link the tool of the day to the previous episode or to just add it to the tool of the day channel or the live chat. But you can find it if you're in Discord in the tool of the day chat. Maybe somebody will share the link there. But that's available on GitHub. And the first thing you notice with GitHub, the first thing you're going to look at is the README, obviously. I like that they have a big banner icon on the README. It tells you basically what it's going to do, gives you an idea of, it's not a live, like an ASCII Cinema effect where you can see something going on live, but it's a Prometheus monitoring endpoint. So if it were going to be visualized, it would probably just be like your regular HTTP request. So JSON's not going to be very helpful there. I like that. They break it down into a couple sections: how to install the chart, how to configure your Docker credentials, how to tell Prometheus to scrape the metrics. I could actually make a submit request right there, but there's a typo. And then collaboration. Funnily enough, I didn't actually look at the collaboration section before I made a pull request. I should probably do that from now on. They have a link to their website. Let's look and see what they have. Products, software developed for you. just a bunch of stuff. Not sure necessarily if it's open source. I don't see any GitHub links, so I won't spend too much time on that. But back to the tool itself. After I generally speaking read the how to install section first and foremost before I dig into the actual code base. You can see this is done in 2 steps. The first step is run git clone, and that's the first thing that gave me a red flag. If you'll notice on the top, it's saying Helm chart for Docker Hub Rate Limit Explorer. The main way that you're going to interact with Helm charts is going to be through the Helm command. Why would you add this extra step where you're using Git when it's avoidable? So the ideas that I had there were, well, is this chart available somewhere else? Maybe it's on Artifact Hub, maybe it's on their own private chart repository. And so I did some digging, and well, quite frankly, I found that it wasn't anywhere. Because this is their primary source of truth for installation, and that's something that I dog-eared later to come back to. The second step, which makes a lot of sense, is just Helm install, release name, Docker Hub Rate Limiter Explorer chart, and then dumping it into the proper namespace. And then after that, you're good to go. You just have to configure Docker Hub credentials, and you'll be able to use the Prometheus exporter. So after I saw that, I had that dog-eared section in the install. I wanted to take a look at what the chart looks like. Maybe the chart is complicated. Maybe the chart isn't quite fully fleshed out. Maybe that's why it hasn't made its way all the way up to a Helm repository. You'll notice that there are no releases, so that means that they're not necessarily tying in the Helm packages so that you could download them from GitHub. You can see that I think in the yesterday's Tool of the Day section of Discord, I went through a couple of check marks. The first thing I look at is the Docker file. I noticed that they're using an Alpine build, so you can guarantee that it's going to be lightweight. It's not going to have as much cruft. You can see that they're doing a multi-stage build because there's multiple from commands. And then you can see that it's just a basic entry point, and there's not too much actually going on here. If we look back at the main directory, there's a license. I should probably look at those more regularly, but generally speaking, if I see the right license, I'll keep an eye out for more of the Elasticsearch licenses. Hopefully they don't start popping up on random tool of the days, but we'll see what happens. The requirements.txt, I didn't drill in too much to the Python, primarily because I assumed that within a half an hour or within the dedicated hour that I used to give to the tool of the days, I wasn't going to be able to get in there and make corrective changes to any Python code. I'll leave that for people that use Python on a daily basis. So beyond that, I looked into the chart. The chart is just your standard chart directory. You can see that there's a README explaining the chart, how to explain the chart. This is more or less just copied and pasted off of the first section. Then when we look at the values down here, you can see that they're pretty standard. It's a pretty standard format. There's a config section in the Helm chart, and then there's a service monitor section. By default, the service monitor is disabled. Additional labels, there are none by default. The namespace into which the service monitor is deployed, if not set, will the same as the chart, etc., etc. So these are all just Prometheus knobs that you can change. And then the important thing that's actually going to be the functionality, which I would probably put another dog-ear the page here, Docker Hub username and Docker Hub password. You'll notice that in the previous README that there was a section where they suggested that there's an additional step to do the Helm upgrade. I would want to dig in and find out why you're not just setting that by default, they're not going to set it by default, but makes this more prominent as a required Helm chart value or something to that nature. But the other side of that is that you want to be able to deploy a Helm chart into an environment without it failing sometimes. So at least this way you can deploy it and not have to worry about not having a username. And so you can throw it in like Helm chart. So for instance, I come from the Rancher world. Sometimes with the partner charts, you want the default values to install without failure, even with some amount of functionality. Digging down a little bit further, you can just see basic chart information. And the last thing I want to mention here in this section before I go into how I started making corrections is that it turns out they're using a pretty robust helm system. They're using custom templated helpers. And the way that I realized that is, I don't remember exactly which one it was. There we go. Common labels there. So they're making use of those helpers, and you can see everything's broken down properly into the right component. I think in the deployment, you can see that, no, there was extra comment somewhere that just really convinced me that this was ready to go. This was a fully fledged Helm chart, not an afterthought, not something that somebody did on a weekend project. And I guess that makes sense because it's under the VID organization. So with that being done and knowing the two sections that I'd like to improve, I went into, honestly, I don't remember how to do it on a daily basis. I wanted to find out how to serve this Helm chart from the releases on a GitHub page. Long story short, if we go to, let's close this. I think somewhere in here I have github.com repositories. Actually, let me just go here. 1 second. I have the link that I'm stealing from the tool of the day. Oh, that's in the wrong section. There we go. So long story short, I turned the GitHub pages of my own fork of the repo into a way to serve the Helm repository. So now I can just do a Helm repo add and then a Helm install, and everything works without having to do an additional Git clone. And so the way that I did that was, originally in the past, I've gone through repos and I've manually modified the index.yaml, manually packaged the components, and then set them into releases. And yesterday I thought to myself, well, there's got to be a better way. I know that there's a bunch of companies that are taking third-party charts and packaging them up and making the stream work a little bit better. And so I did some digging. And I think one of these charts, or one of these links, there we go. So I just did a Google search, host chart repository on GitHub pages. The first one that shows up is from April 16, 2019. And this one will take you through more of a manual process on how to use GitHub pages, the step-by-step guide, what you're doing through the GitHub UI, and then what you're doing through the Helm components. You can see that there's a couple of manual steps. You're making sure that you have the right directory. You're using the Helm command to create a stub. You're linting the chart, and then you're creating the package, and then you're also adding the index file. You're doing that through the Helm command. You're not doing that manually, and then you're pushing that. But like I said, that's a bunch of manual steps, and so I wasn't really happy with that. And like I said in the Discord chat, I wanted to see something shiny and new because I know there's got to be somebody that's created something. So I did some Googling. Again, well, I guess I did some searching on GitHub, and I found that Helm themselves maintain something called Chart Releaser. Chart Releaser is, actually, I can make this available in the chat. I put that in the live chat. Cool. So the chart releaser is the first place I saw. That's actually just going to install a CLI. That CLI is going to give you some commands. The process, I'm not going to do a nested tool of the day, going down further and further throughout when I do these, because that would burn up all my time. Effectively, when you're using open source tooling, there's a recursion that you're using basically 10% of all of the open source tools available on GitHub. But the tool itself, it's coming from Helm, so you can generally assume that it's going to be pretty reliable. I don't know, I didn't find any time when they were using it themselves. They have a Helm example repo, which I'll also show in a couple seconds. But I didn't find any examples in the wild, more or less. But assuming that Helm is going to do good Helm things, I looked at this CR application. I went in and I downloaded the latest release. I'm running a WSL. So I just downloaded the AMD 64, copied that over, and started running that. So if I switch over here, you can see that, which directory am I in? CNCN Tool of the day. Don't have anything here. I have the CR command. The CR command gives you the ability to update a Helm index, package the Helm charts, upload the Helm chart packages to GitHub releases, and print version information. So the process there was that I went back to the repository and I cloned it. Let's git clone exporter, change directory Docker Hub. We'll see that it's got everything in it that we expected. CR, forget the command that I wanted to run, CR index. Well, first I want to do CR package. And then I wanted to say chart. That'll give us the package. And in the .cr, you can see the package is stored in that directory. That, if I wanted to, I could use the commands that Helm comes to take that over to a Kubernetes cluster and install it there. But it was still kind of a manual process. If I go back into the directory, you can see the next step to host it was going to be CR. Oh, I just saw a Docker post. You might be playing with the CR tool this weekend, but the thing that's going to come next is going to make it so much easier, so you never actually have to touch it. So you're going to go through the process of CR package, CR index, and then you can serve it on GitHub. And so that was still a multi-step process, and I noticed that some people in the public were using this chart repo action. This one, chart releaser action. This is going to encapsulate all of the commands into a GitHub action. So if you're using something publicly on GitHub, then you have the ability to just copy and paste this into your repo effectively, and you have everything done for you. To prove that, if we go over to and I can actually make this one available in the chat. If we look at my repositories, you'll see my fork, the Docker Hub rate limit exporter. I have this new GitHub workflow. This GitHub workflow is verbatim exactly what they had in that repository. You're going through, it's called release charts on a push to the main branch. Thank you, Adrian. There we go. So in my repository, we have a GitHub workflows directory. In there, we have copied and pasted the CR actions from the chart actions repo. It's exactly as you see it here. The main things that I want to point out here is that since it's a GitHub action, it's basically fully configurable. Here you can see that on push to the main branch, you can release it. If maybe this Helm chart is nested in some sort of deployment process, you could change that to a different branch. But the jobs here are going to be release. The steps are going to be checkout. Obviously, if it's GitHub action, generally speaking, your first action is going to be to check out things. Beyond that, you're going to make sure that you're using the proper username and email. You're going to install Helm to get the Helm CLI commands, and then it's just going to run the Helm chart releaser. To go into detail a little bit on that, you'll see that the script that this guy is running is, if we look at, that's a demo. I want to go into, I keep losing that repository. Helm chart releaser action. There are two files that you want to look at here, the actions.yaml and the cr.sh. The action.yaml, that's going to be the first thing that GitHub action is calling. That's what's going to give you the ability to add inputs. You'll see here that there are 4 inputs. You can specify which version of the binary you're going to use. I kept the default. You can specify everything in a config file if you wanted to do everything with configuration as code, and keep that separate from the GitHub action. You could specify the charts directory. The charts directory is going to be with something I ran into with the repo, in that I had to restructure the way that the charts were. It made more sense for me as a anonymous public pull requester to change the chart structure so that they can assume that I haven't done anything weird with the GitHub action. If I were in charge of the repository, I would probably change the GitHub action such that it conforms to the pre-existing repository. But I wanted to guarantee that it was successful, or at least that he saw it, or whoever it was. I don't know if it's a he or she. Whoever was in charge of the pull request, approving the pull request, felt safe. Beyond that, the last couple things I want to mention here are that it's going to be just running a couple conditional loops. If inputs.version, if inputs.config, repo URL, and then ultimately it's just going to run the script that's sitting alongside it in the directory. And that's where all the magic happens. cr.sh. In this script, the main things that you want to point out are that it's basically just a wrapper around the CR tool. You can see that it needs a GitHub environment variable. One thing I want to point out is that the variable that's set by default, and I think I should be able to, I lost it again. The variable down here that's set by default, that's something that's auto-associated with GitHub. And so if you try to set a secret in your GitHub repository to GitHub_token, it's going to bounce that back saying that this is a reserved value. And so you don't set it, you just let GitHub handle all of the tokening. It's going to generate a token that's associated with GitHub Actions. Back to the chart releaser script. You can see that it's going to do some discovery. This is the point where I found out that my chart structure was wrong, because regardless of how many pushes I made to the main branch, it wouldn't do any updates. It wouldn't produce any releases. And so I found out that I just had to put it in the right directory in order for that to be picked up. And here you can see it's going to go through installing the chart releaser. It's going to clean everything up. It's going to create the directory. It's going to change the index directory. And it's going to basically make sure that you release the chart, it updates the index, and then it pushes it and takes care of all the GitHub actions for you. There's a bunch of gobbledygook about the CLI. Install chart releaser, look up latest tag, filter charts, look up change charts, package chart, release chart, update index, and then you're good. So what that ends up producing is, if we go back to my chart, which is gone again. Let's go to my fork. You can see that the different, after you run it, you get to see the Docker Hub rate limit exporter in the releases. That's going to take the version from the Helm chart, and it's just going to take the name from the Helm chart as well. I didn't go too far into depth as to changing the way that it's going to be formatted, but you could probably change the Docker Hub rate limit exporter pretty easily. So if we go back here, actually, with the remaining 5 minutes, let me show you it in action. Change directory. I believe I'm sharing my terminal now. If we go into latest, we see that this is the directory. If we go into the charts directory and we look at Docker Hub, we'll see that it's got an icon now. I added an icon to this chart just for the sake of linting. Let's change chart.yaml. Let's just say there's a minor version change or patch version change, and that change is values.yaml. We're going to change the replica count to 2. And git add, we'll see those values have changed. Git commit modify values. Git push origin main. And then if we switch back over to GitHub, we should see in the actions a newly generated action. That's the modify values. In the modify values, we can follow the release as it's going. Usually they're happening pretty quick. I don't know whether or not, there we go. Git's going to set the job up. It's going to go through all of the steps that we had previously. Apparently I had a problem with the log. One file changed, 11 assertion, pushing to GitHub pages, post checkout. Should be good to go. Everything seems successful. Reporting is successful there. Go back to code. We'll see that there's a new latest 17 seconds ago, 0.2.3. I was really blown away by this. I've gone through a lot of efforts to maintain and update charts in the past. Generally speaking, it's been a manual process. I'm just an individual. I'm not doing it with an organization. But it's automation magic to me. And really all I had to do was just make sure I had the right directory structure and then just put that releaser action in there. So that, oh, we've got 4 minutes left. So I guess I could talk a little bit about adding the pull request back. Just some things that I've been doing with the that I plan on doing with the show. Obviously, I could make a change to the grammar mistakes if I see those. Those really aren't high priority. The next thing I would probably do is see what modifications I can make to the chart, like I said, to make this a little bit more visible. But I went for the quickest route to get there. I created a pull request. That pull request, you can yell at me for having bad pull request information, but I just added the workflow with update releases and serve a Helm repository. This will allow users to run Helm repo add instead of git clone. If you're willing to accept this, you will need to create a GitHub Pages branch and enable GitHub Pages on the repository. And it looks like they're going to review it this weekend, and we'll see if it gets pushed. I've done this with 2 repos now, and they've really enjoyed the fact that somebody's anonymously pushing something. The first one met a little bit of scrutiny. The first one I did was I should still have it here. Your repositories, secret. Nope, not that one. Init. I guess it's gone. But you remember on Adrian's show a little while back, there was a time when there was a container init that would allow you to pull secrets from a secret store and encapsulate them without having any access to them from the environment or from the config. I did a pull request of that. And if you guys like this segment and you think that it has legs, I'll continue to do so, and maybe we'll expand it on to Wednesday, and I'll do things kind of lockstep with the Tuesday, Thursday show. So with that being said, there are 2 minutes left. Let me look back over at the live chat. I haven't really been following that. It's difficult to keep the context between the two. This experience has given me a lot of appreciation for the way that Adrian has it locked down. But the last thing I don't have a closing statement, but like I said, I'm not pinning myself necessarily to the previous day's tool of the day. So if there's anything that you guys want to look at specifically, just add it to the show suggestions in Discord, respond to the YouTube post, or maybe add to a YouTube post or a reply to the Twitch, comment on the Twitch. Any way that you can get that information to me, and if I can find that there's a meaningful way to teach another tool or how I would interact with that, I'd be happy to do so. Thank you, Adrian. The cube secret's in it. You'll see me and the guy talking about some of the ways that you can modify that to make it a little bit more straightforward. That example, without going into too much detail, required a lot of extra steps to get started from not having any experience with it, and so I made the user start experience a lot easier. Cool. So I guess, as always, since this is Coffee and Cloud Native, I am going to wrap it up here and say, have a great weekend. This was a blast. I hope I get to do it again. And as always, stay caffeinated.